And good morning. It's April, which is Alcohol Awareness Month. I'm Diane Fontenot, the Seacoast Mental Health Center Program Manager for the Substance Use Disorder Program, and am here with a couple of my comrades. And we're going to do a little bit of discussion, just talking about our experiences, what we've experienced personally, and what we've seen in the field, working in the field of substance use disorders, to raise awareness around alcohol and substance use disorders. John, would you like to introduce?
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Diane. My name is John Burns. I'm the director for SOS Recovery, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. I am also a family member. So I've had a family member who has struggled with alcohol, heroin addiction for several years, and have just had a lot of exposure to this field in the work I do.
Rebecca?
And hi, I'm Rebecca Troop. I'm the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center. I'm also a woman in long-term recovery from alcohol addiction. And so, from the work that I do in the community, I do a lot of writing, and I've done some speaking about it and just worked with a lot of young women in the field and get to sort of, I have a lot of exposure, obviously, with working closely with Diane and with partners like John and his organization.
Awesome. And I think I failed to mention right in the start too that I'm also a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and other substance uses. So we all have both personal and professional experience in what we have experienced and what we have watched and help other people through, and learned a lot along the way in knowing that none of us are unique to one situation. And so I think one of the purposes of doing this chat was just to let people know that we understand what it feels like contemplating seeking help, what it's like for family members, what it's like to be part of a community and the stigma, and how do I access help, and do I even need help? Am I overreacting to the idea that I might need help? Because alcohol is so greatly accepted in our society, in our community, in New Hampshire in particular, and in New England, it's very much, there's not a lot going on. It's the activity of the weekend, of the, out to dinner, of the parties, whatever. So it becomes very much ingrained into our lives from the time we're little. And not surprisingly, some people have more of a struggle with it than others when they grow up.
Yeah, and I think, so maybe I'll start. I know we wanted to talk about family, and the impact on family, what it feels like for us being a member of a family, if we're struggling or if we're not sure if we're struggling. I know that the destruction that I caused some of my family during my time drinking was probably longer than I realized it. And there's sort of, there's what the family is experiencing and there's what the person is experiencing, and they're not on the same timeline and they're not the same things, and they're both incredibly, incredibly valid. And I think it's really important to recognize the family in this whole process. So John, I know that you do a lot of work with families and you sort of have a lens into that. What would you say? I think about what my family would say to me. Some was right and some was wrong about when they started to get concerned. What have you seen with that in your experience around that?
So I think as a family member myself, and having worked with a lot of family members, the biggest thing is, the first thing I always tell parents and family members, regardless of whether they're a parent or spouse, is be careful of those who come to you with all the answers when you're reaching out. Because if anybody had all the answers, we wouldn't have the challenges that we do. And oftentimes the unsolicited advice we get from those with very little experience working with substance use disorder are the most harmful recommendations. So if I can count the number of people that told father, like you need to kick her out, or you need to be more disciplinarian, or you need to just be softer and you need to do this. If I could tell you the number of people with that looking back had no experience,
Mhm.
that just good intentions, but no experience.
Right.
And so I always tell people like, I wish I wasn't, hadn't gotten, I wish I didn't know as much as I did about substance use disorder at this point. It's not something I ever saw myself getting into, and certainly not as a profession, let alone the knowledge that I have. But educate yourself, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of good information out there. There's also a lot of misinformation, and I think really like educating yourself on that as a family member is the most critical, because at the same time, that's very difficult when you're in crisis, because as a family member, you're so worried about it that you spend every minute of your life, oftentimes chasing your loved one around or trying to monitor them, and most of those things are actually very ineffective. But it's what we do. We try to fix those we love. We teach that in motivational interviewing, that writing reflex, which is basically trying to fix somebody all the time. And those of us in the field all know that we do it. It's our instinct. And that's like, we spend half our lives trying to like refrain from doing that because we know we're not supposed to, but it's where we default to.
And it's very easy to talk to other families and try and give advice or direct. And yet when it's your own, you see things through a new lens. And no, when I talk to a parent, and as a parent myself, I know that I don't take that hard line of, well, it's tough love, and if they're not towing the line, you have to kick them out. Because if someone came to me and said, you have to kick your kid out, it's a little different story. It's like, as a mom, as a parent, as a dad, as a parent, this is like my whole world has been taught that I'm supposed to nurture and fix and heal my children, and yet we can't do it all, but we also don't need to turn our backs on our loved ones. They need us the most at that point. So it is a balancing line. And there are a lot of, like you said, there are a lot of really old school, tough love kind of advice out there that is not always the most effective for people at all.
So, oh, sorry, John.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to say that, and the two of you are completely unaware of this, and that's why I'm so excited to have this conversation. The two of you are like literally telling my story right now. My family my parents faced that. So we're going back 12 years ago, and they were advised by one person that this is what you have to do, and not minimizing the situation at all of what was going on. But they and my husband at the time were they had no idea what to do, and what does somebody do? And, and it was a horrible situation. And yet it was a really horrible situation that happened as a result of this advice. And thank God it landed where it was. But, my parents for 8 months, every time the phone rang, every time the door knocked, was wondering if it was that call. And the conversations I've had with them, that I had about 6 months and after I entered recovery, it was one of the toughest conversations of, here's exactly what happened to me. And then them saying, here's what that feeling was, what that was. So what I would wanted to know now, and this is 12 years is a big growth period for us in the state, thank goodness, in the recovery world. So what if they didn't know what to do? What should they have done? Like, where do they go for that information?
And I think one of the greatest resources out there that I see are family support groups. I think that's challenging for a lot of family members because of stigma. And when I say family support groups, I mean different kinds. And so there's certainly 12-step like Al-Anon. That's a tremendous resource. And I always encourage people to look at that as well as look at other options. Like, it doesn't have to just be a 12-step, much like individual recovery. I think there's different pathways for family members too. So, I think one of the biggest challenges, so I founded a family support group, and we're not based on 12-step or really anything. It's just a secular group that discusses it and has an open conversation that's supportive of family members. And I always try to encourage family members, whatever you do, like choose a few different types and find one that you feel comfortable in and don't go to one. So I think as a family member, you want somebody to fix this.
Right.
And one of the biggest challenges having facilitated a family support group is seeing how many family members come in. And as I say, they basically come to me saying, can you just hit that Staples easy button and fix this? They don't actually say that, but that's, it's
Mhm.
very clear that that's what's in their, that's what's in their mind is like, can we just fix this? And then oftentimes they come to one meeting and we never see them again. And that's like those meetings really are about self-care and taking care of yourself before you can take care of your loved ones. Talk about it with, when you get on an airplane, they tell you to make sure you use the oxygen mask for yourself before you do for those around. It's
And
a
I
great,
think that we try to do some level too of educating around what is self-care for you in a family situation where there's crisis, and what are boundaries, and where to set a boundary, and where is that line between enabling and helping, and which types of activities are actually helping versus enabling, and fighting, and just recognizing, I think, that people fight that inner battle of I want the answer today. I want to know what to do right now to fix this, and that it isn't, it isn't an end game like that overnight. It's a journey to get there for almost everybody looking for help in recovery. It takes time, effort, patience, and reset. And each individual has to decide, how long am I willing and able to do this? And what do I need to do to be okay through that process? It's not easy for people.
yeah. And I think just adding to that too, like the people's response to substance use disorder is so varied. There's this desire to put things in a box, and like not everybody fits in that box. In
Right.
fact, people do not. So I mean, so we know, like, gonna kind of nerd out on statistics, but we know there's about 22 million people in recovery. But we also know, like, recent research is showing that about 50% of the people in recovery have identified as resolving problematic substance use that would fit the criteria for a substance use disorder, but they don't identify as in recovery. So about 50% of the people who are in recovery in this country don't identify as in recovery. We don't know who they are. We just know that they've identified what would meet the criteria of resolving. So, the traditional recovery pathways may not be what your loved one's going to find. Like, as I say, abstinence isn't the end all be all. It's what is necessary for a lot of people, but then there's a lot of people that don't require abstinence to get well. And so, like, you have to kind of open your mind and then look at your biases, I think, as a family member too, to say, like, what I want might not work.
Right.
So that can be certainly challenging as any, whether you're a spouse or a parent or having a family member who's a parent yourself or a adult with substance use disorder. Like, you want to fix it. You think like, you can't do this, and sometimes they can, and that might not be the correct response.
So I think that's a perfect segue for the next session that we're going to do for folks, which is kind of the continuum of drinking. Sort of, I might have, what is the path? Are people's differences in that? And so that's the next session that we'll be doing will be on that one. So that was great, John. Thank you for that automatic segue.
Completely unintentional.